My name is Marin Vale, 28 years old. I grew up in a house where the lawn was sharper than anyone's tone needed to be, and the windows reflected a family. We were never brave enough to admit we weren't. My parents, Joseph and Ruth, polished everything that could be seen and ignored everything that couldn't. The photographs on the mantel were a timeline of our household mythology. Perfect vacations, perfect Christmases, perfect Cheryl. My older sister was the story they told themselves: smart, charming, calibrated for applause. By the time I was 10, neighbors already called her our future lawyer, and my parents smiled like they'd willed her into existence. I stood a step outside the frame, the girl with graphite on her fingers, trying to design her way into focus. When I won my elementary school art contest, I carried the certificate home like a fragile plate. Mom took it between two fingertips, smiled in a way that was polite to the paper, but not to me, and left it on the kitchen counter beneath a grocery list. That same evening, she hammered another hook into the living room wall for Cheryl's debate medals. The metal clinked against the glass like punctuation, and I learned the sentence didn't include me. Dad peeked at a cityscape I'd sketched, buildings stitched together with neon and dusk, murmured, "That's nice, Marin," and turned back to a phone call telling someone about Cheryl's tournament. I remember the glow of the TV on his jaw, the way he nodded at a voice that wasn't mine. There were good moments, I won't lie. Dad driving us both to school with the radio low. Mom buying me a set of decent brushes because every girl needs a hobby. But even the kindnesses had footnotes. When I asked if they could come to my first school art show, Mom had a late shift and Dad needed to handle paperwork. The gym smelled like varnish and oranges, and other parents crouched to take photos at their kids' eye level. I stood beside my corkboard as if it were a door waiting to be knocked on. No one did. High school turned the volume up. Cheryl left for college, then law school, and our dinner table widened into a stage where her speakerphone updates grew bright as theater lights. "They want me back for summer," she'd announce. Dad would laugh. Mom would say, "That's my girl," and I'd mention an acceptance into a local gallery program. "Be practical," Dad would say, already scrolling. Mom once said, lightly, not looking at me, "In this world, money finds its way to where it matters." I told myself she meant budgeting. Later, I learned it meant something else. If I felt invisible at home, I built weight elsewhere. My art teacher took my portfolio like a promise, scribbling notes, pushing me to refine. At 18, I hung my work at a small Toledo gallery, my name printed crooked on a placard. The wood floors creaked, the lights hummed. Strangers stood close enough to fog the glass. I brought 2 extra invites for my parents and tucked them into the pocket of my dress all night, damp with my palms. They never walked through the door. A block away, a party balloon bobbed in our front window for Cheryl's law school acceptance. When I fell asleep, I could hear the muffled chorus of congratulations through our walls like a neighbor's TV. College softened some edges. I chose graphic design, the sweet spot where art met clarity, where a message could be shaped until it arrived exactly as intended. Early that fall, I met Michael, a teaching assistant with a denim jacket and the kind of curiosity that listens before it speaks. He traced the hierarchy in my layouts with a pencil tip and asked why I tucked the call to action under the photo. "Don't whisper what you want people to hear," he said. We spent hours in the lab dissecting typography like it could save someone. Nicole arrived like a comet, a photography major with ink under her thumbnail and a laugh with teeth in it. She became my nearest person without asking permission, dragging me to openings, critiquing my color choices, showing me how to tilt a frame until the story behaved. I worked harder. Freelance logos for places that smelled like coffee grinds and fresh paint. A student-run magazine spread that made the campus Twitter for an afternoon. An internship at a small studio where the owner mispronounced my name until he didn't. I sent updates home like messages in bottles. I imagined my parents pulling them from the surf and drying them on a towel. Dad replied once, "Proud of you for keeping busy. Call your sister. She's got an offer." Another time, Mom asked if I was keeping up socially compared to Cheryl. I learned to swallow the part of me that wanted to be seen and poured it into kerning and tone-on-tone palettes. By senior year, the work began to speak louder than I had ever been taught to. A regional campaign found its footing. My comps went live. My name appeared in a small blog with a spelling error. I didn't bother to correct. I sent the link to my parents and waited, my mouth tasting like pennies. "That's nice," Dad texted. "Cheryl's working on a big case." I showed Nicole the message. She rolled her eyes hard enough to rattle the table. "They're allergic to joy unless it's theirs," she said. Then, trailing off, "They don't get to define you, Vale." Michael printed the blog post, circled my name, and taped it to my apartment wall above the kettle. I tell you this so you understand the arithmetic that followed. The sum of 1,000 small dismissals equals a girl who stops asking. Quietly, I stopped bringing them good news as offerings. I let my work be my own proof. The agency that hired me after graduation did so because my portfolio fit like a key. My promotion came because I outlived my doubt at 3 a.m. in front of an Illustrator file. When my mom asked on the phone if I was keeping it realistic, I said yes instead of saying brilliant. It became easier. It also hollowed me. Michael changed the math, not because he legendary saved me, because he recognized me. We started walking after class along the Maumee River, which in spring looks like a ribbon someone twisted too tightly. He'd tell me about grids. I'd tell him about negative space as oxygen. We built a language that existed outside my parents' house. Nicole found us once on a bench and snapped a photo, our heads bent toward the same page, our fingers smudged with ink. "Frame it," she said. "Proof of life." The proposal wasn't cinematic in scale, it was cinematic in intention. We were by the river again, the water dark and stubborn, the wind tugging my hair into my mouth. Michael knelt because he's the kind of man who still believes some gestures deserve gravity. The ring was simple, a clean line, the sort of thing that would never yell over the rest of my life. His voice shook in the second sentence, and I said yes before he found the third, because some answers are muscle memory. We planned small on purpose. A riverside restaurant with light that turns everything forgiving at 4 p.m., a string quartet that Nicole bullied into learning one indie song for me, and an invitation that I designed with my hands shaking in the best way. I put my parents on the guest list first, then Cheryl, then felt both brave and ridiculous calling to confirm. Mom didn't pick up. I left a message I had rehearsed. It would mean the world if you could come. Dad texted, "We'll try." I printed their place cards anyway, embossing the V in Vale until the paper warmed under the dye. If you're waiting for me to say I didn't care whether they came, you'll be waiting a long time. I cared the way a body cares about oxygen. The night I addressed the envelopes, I remembered hanging lights in that gym, remembered the smoothness of my certificate under a grocery list, remembered Mom's line about money finding its way, and wondered, like I had as a teenager, if love did too. The past slid in and out of focus like a page beneath tracing paper. 2 weeks before the wedding, an old financial email resurfaced when I was searching my inbox for a sample reading. Sophomore year, a tuition refund check had been misrouted after I switched dorms. The bursar reissued it to my family address at Ruth's request. I remembered handling it myself, walking to the office, signing a form, making sure the funds were correct. It had felt like one of the first adult things I'd done. I closed the email and promised myself it was nothing, then sat very still until the urge to call my mother passed. Facts first, fury second, Michael liked to say. I pour that into my work. I tried to pour it into this. The week before our date, I mailed the last invites. Nicole teased me for aligning the stamps to the top right edge like a grid. "If they don't show up, I'll take up 2 chairs and heckle on your behalf," she said. George and Diane, Michael's parents, asked what flowers I'd chosen and offered to host the post-reception brunch. Diane cupped my cheek when she hugged me, an old-fashioned gesture that stirred a grief I couldn't name. That night, Michael and I moved the dining table to make room for borrowed folding chairs and tested the playlist. In the middle of a song, he took my hands, pulled me in, and whispered, "Whatever happens, we will be more than that day." I believed him. I also believed, stubbornly, maybe foolishly, that this would be the moment my parents crossed the bridge toward me, that they'd stand in their good clothes and watch me step into a life I chose, that I'd feel the invisible weight lift as they clapped at the right time. I pressed my thumb into the invitation where their names gleamed and tried not to notice the indentation it left. I told myself not to hope, and then I did anyway. On the night before our wedding, I placed their cards on the table by the aisle, left of center, where I could see them when I turned, like I had learned to place a call to action, exactly where the eye would land. The room was set, the river kept moving, and I stood in the middle of my own design, wondering if what you build can make the people you love step inside at last. The morning of my wedding broke pale and thin, the kind of light that feels undecided. I stood before the mirror in the Riverside restaurant's small dressing room, lacing my gown with trembling fingers. I had designed it myself, layers of satin folded like origami, each seam a quiet rebellion against being overlooked. Nicole fussed with my veil, muttering about angles and exposure like the photographer she was, but her voice cracked when she caught my reflection. "You look undeniable, Marin," she whispered. I smiled, though my eyes kept darting to the clock. The ceremony began. Music spilled softly from the quartet. Michael waited at the end of the aisle, his eyes steady, his lips barely moving, as if he were already whispering vows to me. I wanted to focus on him, but my gaze betrayed me. I looked to the row where their names gleamed in silver script: Joseph Vale, Ruth Vale, Cheryl Vale. 3 chairs, unclaimed. The sight hit like a stone to the chest. I breathed in through my nose, out through my teeth, willing myself not to falter. Nicole raised her camera high, flashing me a grin meant to hold me upright. George and Diane sat in the front row, their hands intertwined, their smiles brimming with warmth. Diane mouthed, "We're here." It anchored me. I let Michael's gaze reel me forward, step by step, veil floating behind me like a white flag in surrender. The vows came and steadied me. Michael's voice trembled, but never broke. "You've taught me that love is not performance, it's presence," he said. My throat ached, because in that moment, I felt the absence of my parents more than ever. I spoke my promises too, not in the flowery way I had written them, but raw and pared down. "I will never make you invisible." Michael's eyes glistened, and he nodded as if I had given him the only vow that mattered. At the reception, the air filled with laughter and clinking glasses. Friends toasted. Nicole dragged me to the dance floor until I could barely breathe from laughing. George gave a heartfelt speech about gaining not just a daughter-in-law, but a daughter. Diane brushed my hair back from my face and said, "You're ours now." The words struck deeper than I expected, untying a knot I'd carried for years. Yet beneath the glow, I couldn't stop glancing at the table where 3 chairs sat untouched, like open wounds dressed in white linens. Every absence was louder than the music. After the last dance, when the fairy lights dimmed and guests drifted home, I checked my phone. A notification blinked. My chest lifted with a ridiculous hope, maybe a message from Mom, maybe some excuse, even a lie I could cling to. I opened it, and the hope curdled. It was a video. Joseph and Ruth sun-kissed, laughing on a Hawaiian beach. Cheryl leaned into Jeffrey, champagne flute raised. Palm trees swayed above them. The ocean hissed at their backs. My mother's caption: "Celebrating our star's engagement in paradise." Not a word about me, not a mention of my wedding. I watched it twice, as if repetition would change the script. The laughter was crueler the second time, the glimmer of their glasses sharper, my chest clenched so tight I couldn't breathe. Nicole slipped beside me, saw the screen, and her jaw hardened. She didn't say "I told you so." She didn't need to. Instead, she wrapped an arm around me and whispered, "They don't get to hurt you tonight." Michael approached, saw the video, and his face darkened. He didn't speak either. He simply pulled me into his chest, one hand cupping the back of my head, the other curling around my waist. His heart beat steady against my cheek, grounding me when mine felt shattered. George and Diane caught a glimpse as well. Diane reached for my hand, squeezing hard enough to steady me. "Don't look at them," she said softly. "Look at who's here." I tried. God, I tried. But later, when the apartment was quiet, I replayed the video again. Each laugh was a rejection, each sip of champagne a reminder that they chose her celebration over mine, and broadcast it to the world. I stared until the phone dimmed, until Michael gently pried it from my hand and whispered, "You're worth more than this. Don't let them brand you invisible." I turned toward him, toward the warmth he offered, but deep inside, the wound festered. Not because they didn't come, but because they made sure I knew their absence was intentional, celebratory, and final. And yet I told myself maybe this was clarity. Maybe now I finally knew where I stood. A week after the wedding, when the flowers had browned in their vases and the dress hung quiet in its bag, my phone rang. The screen flashed Dad. My first instinct was to ignore it, but some part of me, still that child hoping for recognition, pressed accept. His voice was clipped, more business than father. Marin, we need to talk about the loan. I blinked, confused. What loan? The one we took for your college years. 20,000. It's time you contribute back. Cheryl's wedding is coming, and it's only fair you help cover it. For a moment, I thought I misheard. The words rattled around my skull, scraping raw. You want me to pay for Cheryl's wedding? It's not for Cheryl, he said smoothly, as if rehearsed. It's to settle what we covered for you. Family obligations go both ways. Behind him, I caught the muffled hum of Mom's voice, urging, agreeing. My throat went dry. I hung up before my voice could betray me. Michael looked up from his laptop, concern flickering in his eyes. What happened? I told him. His jaw tightened. They can't keep rewriting your life, Marin. Facts first. Fury second. Check the records. That night, I dug through old folders, the paper smelling faintly of dust and ink. Every loan statement was there, every payment I had made, every freelance gig I had taken to chip away at debt. All cleared, all mine. I logged into my bank portal, scrolling through years of proof. My name, my money, my responsibility. There was no sign of Joseph or Ruth. But then, tucked in the archives of my university email, I found something. A message from sophomore year. A tuition refund check had been misrouted after I switched dorms. The bursar confirmed it had been reissued, sent at my mother's request, to our home address. The memory returned. Me, walking into the office, signing forms, correcting the error, handling it alone. My parents had nothing to do with it. Yet here was a breadcrumb, proof they'd once dipped a hand into my finances, even if briefly, proof they could twist into a claim. I printed everything. Bank records, bursar emails, loan closure notices, and laid them out across the table like evidence at a trial. Michael sat beside me, eyes scanning, his hand firm on mine. You don't owe them a cent. The next day I called Dad back. My voice was steady, but my heart thundered. I checked the records, I said. My loans were paid in full. By me. There's no debt. Silence stretched on the line, then his scoff. You're misunderstanding, Marin. We've always covered for you. Cheryl's wedding is important. You should want to help. I heard Mom in the background, her voice like static. It's only right. And something in me cracked. Not the fragile kind of crack that breaks. No, the sharp kind that lets light in. I remembered her words on the phone before my wedding, calling it a trivial event for someone at the bottom. I let the phrase slip from my tongue like venom. Don't contact me about trivial matters again. The silence on the line this time wasn't confusion. It was stunned recognition. Dad sputtered, but I didn't give him the chance. I'm done, I said, and hung up. I sat in the quiet, my hand still holding the phone like it might burn through my palm. My pulse raced, but for the first time, the weight shifted. Michael pulled me into his chest. You did the right thing. Nicole, when I told her, paced my living room like a storm. They're unbelievable. Twisting money, rewriting history. Do not give them a dime. That night, Diane and George came by with a casserole. Diane took my hand, her grip warm, unyielding. You're family to us, she said, and the dam inside me finally broke. But even as I felt their love, the thought gnawed. It wasn't just about money. It was about control, about tethering me back into Cheryl's orbit no matter how far I'd walked. And I began to wonder, if they could rewrite a debt, what else had they rewritten about me? I didn't sleep that night. The glow of my laptop lit up the room while Michael dozed on the couch, one arm slung over his chest. In front of me, my financial records lay spread like crime scene evidence. Each statement, each cleared balance was a quiet witness. I kept asking myself, why invent a debt that doesn't exist? By dawn, the answer came sharp and bitter, because for my parents, facts were flexible, but control was not. I booked an appointment with Dr. Pamela Scott, the therapist Nicole had sworn by. Her office was small, lined with potted plants that leaned toward the light. She listened as I spilled years of being the shadow child, the empty chairs at my wedding, the audacity of the loan. She didn't interrupt. When I finally fell silent, wrung out, she said, Marin, you've been carrying their expectations like unpaid invoices. Setting boundaries isn't cruelty. It's collection. You're reclaiming what's yours. Her words felt like a key turning in a lock. That night, Michael brewed tea while I sat at the table drafting an email. Nicole perched on the armrest, reading over my shoulder. My first attempt was pleading, full of questions. Why? How could you? Nicole snorted and tapped delete. No, this isn't for them. It's for you. The second draft was sharper, angrier, paragraphs of accusation. Michael slid the mug toward me. Facts first, he said gently. Fury second. So I pared it down, line by line until it was bare. Your actions have shown where I stand in your lives. From the years of favoritism to dismissing my wedding and demanding money for Cheryl's, you've made your priorities clear. I'm done carrying the weight of your expectations. Do not contact me again. Any future attempts will be ignored. Reading it out loud made my throat ache, but Dr. Scott had been right. Boundaries were clarity, not cruelty. My finger hovered over send. Michael placed his hand over mine. This isn't about punishing them, he whispered. It's about saving you. I clicked. The relief was immediate, a wave so strong it made me dizzy. I blocked their numbers, muted their profiles, locked the door of that part of my life. Nicole let out a triumphant whoop and pulled me into a hug. You're free now. But freedom, I discovered, ripples outward. Within weeks, Cousin Mary called me for coffee. She'd always been the quiet ally at family gatherings, the one who slipped me as smiles when no one else was looking. She stirred her latte and leaned across the table. Word's gotten around. People are furious about the Hawaii trip, about that loan story. My mom hasn't returned Ruth's calls in weeks. I blinked. They're actually facing consequences? Mary nodded, eyes glinting. Neighbors are whispering. Aunts and uncles are distancing themselves. Joseph and Ruth built their world on appearances. Now those appearances are cracking. Her words were both vindication and ache. I didn't want revenge, but I couldn't deny the quiet satisfaction. For once, I wasn't the one carrying the shame. Later, Nicole barged into my apartment waving her phone. Guess who asked around at Jeffrey's family dinner, she said. His parents wanted to know why yours skipped your wedding for a beach party. Apparently it didn't sit well. A chill slid down my spine. Cheryl's engagement, the crown jewel my parents had polished so hard, was starting to tarnish. That night, as I sat with Michael on the couch, his arm around me, I realized setting boundaries hadn't just freed me. It had shifted the ground beneath them. Their choices were unraveling, thread by thread. But even as the ripples spread, I knew they weren't done testing me. People who've held power don't surrender it quietly. The question wasn't if they'd try again. It was when. Life without their voices pressing against my chest felt strange, like learning to breathe after years underwater. For the first time, my days belonged to me. I threw myself into projects at the agency, branding campaigns that landed praise, logos that clients said felt alive. In the evenings, I'd sit with my sketch pad on the couch while Michael read beside me, his knee brushing mine, quiet proof that presence is more powerful than performance. Then, one morning, 2 pink lines bloomed on a test in my bathroom. My hands trembled as I stared. The girl who'd grown up starved of recognition was now carrying a life who would never beg for it. I whispered into the mirror, "You will never feel invisible." Michael's reaction was everything. He knelt in the hallway, still in his socks, laughter spilling out of him like a boy. "We're going to be parents," he said, pressing his forehead against mine. Tears streaked my cheeks before I could stop them. Nicole screamed so loudly when I told her that the waiter at the diner nearly dropped his tray. "I am throwing the loudest, most obnoxious baby shower this city has ever seen," she declared. George and Diane began knitting tiny blankets before I'd even reached the second trimester. Their house filled with the smell of fresh yarn and casseroles, the kind of domestic warmth I had never known growing up. At work, I found myself doodling baby shoes in the margins of campaign briefs. At home, I painted the nursery walls in soft strokes, my hands steady, my heart steadier. Michael read parenting books aloud in silly voices, making me laugh so hard I had to sit down. For once, my life wasn't defined by absence. It was brimming with presence. Still, ripples from the boundary email reached me through Mary. She stopped by one afternoon with a box of hand-me-down baby clothes and stories. "Your parents tried to defend themselves at Uncle Ray's cookout," she said, rolling her eyes. "No one bought it. People are done making excuses for them." She hesitated then, lowering her voice. "And Cheryl, well, Jeffrey's family isn't impressed. They asked why she stayed silent when you were left out. They think it says something about her character." I wanted to feel triumphant. Instead, I felt complicated. Cheryl wasn't cruel by nature. She was complicit. Groomed to shine, she'd learned to protect the myth at any cost. I remembered the way she used to slip me gum under the table during family dinners, her quiet rebellion. Maybe she had simply chosen survival over solidarity. Mary glanced at me. Do you want to know the rest? I nodded, bracing. Someone spotted Ruth with a ledger. She keeps track of what everyone owes the family. Your name is scribbled under contributions expected. I let out a breath I didn't realize I was holding. Proof. Not of fraud, not in a courtroom sense, but of mindset. To them, love was an investment, and children were accounts to be managed. I folded a tiny onesie in my lap and whispered, mostly to myself, Emma will never be a line item. Mary frowned. Emma? I smiled for the first time that day. That's her name. And as I spoke it, I felt the room shift. My daughter's future stretched ahead, unbound by ledgers, by favoritism, by the weight of being unseen. She would grow up knowing that love isn't something you owe, it's something you give. Still, part of me knew, before she arrived, there might be one last ripple from the world I'd left behind. Emma came into the world on a rainy afternoon, the kind of day where the sky itself seemed to cry and cleanse at once. The hospital room was small, humming with machines, but the moment she was placed in my arms, everything else dimmed. She was tiny, impossibly so, her fist curling around my finger with a grip fiercer than any I had ever mustered. Michael bent close, tears streaming unchecked down his cheeks. She's perfect, he whispered, as if afraid the walls might steal the words. Holding her, I felt the weight of my past loosen. All the empty chairs, the unreturned calls, the ledger lines of love as obligation, none of it mattered here. Emma didn't need to earn my pride. She simply existed, and that was enough. The days blurred into soft chaos. Nicole showed up with a diaper bag bigger than she was, snapping candid photos of Emma yawning, crying, sleeping. Proof she's already iconic, she declared. George built the crib with military precision, Diane knitting until her fingers ached, swaddling Emma in blankets threaded with patience. Mary came by with baby clothes, sitting beside me on the couch, telling me stories of family gatherings where my absence was noted, where silence about me grew heavier than words. One evening, I sat in the nursery, Emma asleep against my chest, the painted walls glowing faintly in the nightlight. I thought of Dr. Scott's words. Boundaries aren't walls. They're doors to a better life. I realized then I hadn't just shut a door. I had stepped through one, into a room filled with people who chose me back. Work thrived in parallel, though it felt less urgent now. Each campaign, each sketch was proof of resilience, but Emma was proof of love. My daughter would grow up celebrated for who she was, not what role she played in someone else's mythology. 1 week after bringing her home, a small parcel arrived on our doorstep. No return address. Inside was a hand-knit baby blanket in a soft blue, the exact shade of the ribbon from the first art contest I won as a child. My breath caught. Was it from Ruth? From Cheryl? Or had Mary slipped it in as a kindness? I would never know. I folded it carefully and placed it in the dresser. Boundaries meant I didn't need to chase answers anymore. Sometimes, late at night, I wondered if Cheryl ever thought about me, if she regretted her silence. Once Mary mentioned she looked haunted at a dinner, opening her mouth to speak before swallowing the words back down. Maybe one day she'd find the courage to call. Maybe she wouldn't. Either way, I wasn't waiting. As Emma stirred, I kissed her forehead and whispered, "You will always be seen." And to you, listening to my story, I want to say this. Family isn't about blood. It's about who shows up, who stays, who sees you when the rest of the world refuses. Joseph and Ruth taught me what love is not. Michael, Nicole, George, Diane, Mary, even Dr. Scott, they taught me what love is. Looking back, I don't wish away the pain. It carved me into someone who could stand here, a wife, a mother, an artist, a woman who finally knows her worth. If you've been invisible in your own family, know this. You are not the problem. You are not the debt. You can choose yourself, choose your people, and build a life where love is abundant. I built mine, and holding Emma, I know it's the legacy I'll pass on. This is my story, and I'm stronger for it.